something that I was interested in as a concept was this, what I called like narrative gravity.
Yeah,
where
sure.
some words were just heavier than others, or some topics were heavier than others. So, yeah, like if you wrote about something like cancer or something, or you just put that in a story and given that to a character, suddenly the story kind of shifts towards that, and that might have not been what you intended.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I remember I'd written a short story. I think you eventually ended up reading it, but the original version of it.
Right.
So
this is your Seeley story, right?
that one.
Mhm.
It ended up being a person like meeting their family in an art gallery or something, and having
Yeah.
I feel weird about this.
Mm.
But originally the story had something in where they'd seen an old friend on a news report being arrested or something for being a hermit.
Okay.
And they're having the same feelings, like it sort of led on to the same theme, but that was just so much heavier than
Everything
the story
else
was about.
Yeah, sure.
It ended up being like, wow, this person sounds like an asshole.
Yeah.
Because they're just like, wow, this old friend of mine's been arrested because of this old, like, the feelings they had. But what about me?
Right.
Like, that was just a heavier subject.
Yeah,
so
sure.
it kind of pulled the story that way. So I had to take it out because that's not what I wanted to write about.
I see what you mean.
And I think that some ideas are just heavier than others, you know?
I think that's true. Yeah. I mean, I think it's you mentioned the word cancer. I don't think you can mention that word in a story without that being what the story is about. I like, similarly to you, I wrote this story recently called Boca Chica Launch Fever. There's this like actual place in the world called Boca Chica where like Elon Musk launches all his SpaceX rockets, but I didn't want to use the word rocket. And I didn't really want it to be about the rockets, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure.
So I liked the idea that like you would set a story in a place where there's something like very vigorous going on and very obvious going on, but like you just wouldn't mention it because the story is actually about like a husband and a wife struggling to maybe have a baby. And so, yeah, I made the conscious choice early on not to use the word rocket and not to use the word baby.
I see.
And that was kind of the like parameters I set for myself, kind of because of what you're saying, which was that I wanted it to feel really diffuse, the way that they were dealing with these really heavy subjects, or at least there were two sort of points of gravity. As soon as you start saying, oh, it's about this, then I don't know, it just sort of means you have to hit that on the head much harder in a way. You can't look away from that really heavy subject. You have to talk about it explicitly. And I wanted it to be deliberately diffuse.
No, I understand that as well, because I think when I think about writing a story, I often want to write about something which is quite diffuse and I don't really know what it is, or it's quite a nuanced thing. And I have to figure out, I've got this idea of like a solid, a liquid, and a gas or something.
Sure, yeah.
And I feel like solids being like the concrete things that are happening and so on, and you've got like how you write it and so on, and then you've got these like slightly airier things which are maybe that you want to write about. And I think I often come up with ideas that are just the air.
Sure, yeah.
And it's like, how do I need to think about concrete things I can like tie that down or represent it with, which just feels like I'm putting like little weights around the thing and seeing, like, trying to balance it so there's like the thing I want to write about is in the middle. And it's quite hard to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
There's like stacks of rocks people do. They stack all those rocks up in Iceland or something. Like those flat ones. So you get
on the
these
beaches
really
in
huge
Iceland.
Piles, and you're just like placing these rocks over and over, like trying to poke it down until you find a way that just happens to be stable. I feel like it's
the same process.
Have to do that,
yeah, absolutely, because it's sort of, it then at some point has its own structure. Like it has enough weight in a direction to have its own structure, but it's much harder to explain just a feeling or a lack if it's just sort of like up in the air and you don't yet know how you feel about it or how you want to tackle it. It's very difficult to be like, oh, this is a story about this subject. Yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I feel like that's why you need the rock stacking procedure in a way, so that you just sort of keep accumulating concepts and elements in until it has a structure that feels like it's about the thing you actually were wanting to talk about.
Well, yeah, because I think like when you put something into a story as well, you're also not sure how heavy it is. Like you only care about, like, how can I fix this problem in my story? You don't really think about that thing as a whole. So in that other story I wrote, the Seeley one, I ended up making the person like an artist or something.
Right.
And to me, that was just something I put in there because it was a contrivance for the situation.
Sure.
But then you read it and you were like, well, this person's an artist, so that's obviously really important to the story.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no,
I zoomed in on that.
it got left in because it made sense and things, but it's like as a reader, that was heavier to you than I intended it to be when I put it in the story.
Yeah.
So it kind of tilted it in another direction. And that's going to be different for everyone that reads it. So
yeah,
because all these ideas have different amounts of connotations and things attached to them.
Yes.
And that's same with words, and that's just going to be different per reader based on background and whatever.
What you're bringing to it, basically. Yeah. I think that's interesting. There's a book I read recently. It's The Safe Keep, which was on the Booker list. Again, I'm becoming a stereotype of myself who keeps mentioning Booker.
I'm going to make a card that says Booker.
I know. Yeah, you're allowed. I keep mentioning it. But anyway, it was nominated. But anyway, it's called The Safe Keep. And it is ostensibly about a woman who lives in this really nice house. And she's very, very house proud. Basically, her brother starts like dating this mysterious woman. No one really knows where this woman has come from. And he kind of buggers off to do some stuff, and he leaves this woman he's dating with his sister in this house. And she's not happy about it because she loves the house. She doesn't want anyone there with her. It emerges that this woman, this mysterious other woman, her family were the actual original occupants of the home.
This is a Dutch book, right?
It is a Dutch book, yes.
I think I've heard of this, yes.
She is a young Jewish woman whose family were taken to the camps, and then they never got their home back when the camps were liberated. And so there's a process going on subtly where this other woman is trying to take things back from the house that was originally hers. And what's interesting about it is that that's never explicitly mentioned throughout the book. It has to be understood. And you as the reader do understand it, but in the same way to the protagonist, you sort of look away from it because you've got this, you're in the mind of this protagonist who loves the house. And so all you're thinking about is, when is she going to get the house back for quite a bit of the time? Then you realize something else is going on. And I just like things that do that, where there's like a really heavy subject here. The implication is enormous. These people have stolen this house from this family and just made it theirs and never given it back, basically. And like, you could hit that really hard as a subject, or you could do it the way that this author's done it, which is to kind of like keep talking around it, give you this whole romance, give you all these other things to look at, which are not that heavy subject. And I just found that like a really interesting way of talking about something really heavy.
Do you think that's important to do, or that it's easier to talk about? Like, is the sort of like circumlocutory nature of that to like intentionally because the subject is heavy?
Yeah.
Or do you just think that gives like a different feel to the story? Because like partly I think a lot of these things are quite interesting because they're such horrible complex topics. Like you've got these people which are presumably living in the house for a long time, so it's not just a case of like they're evil robbers wearing white masks. But you can't do that, or you might not want the point to emerge without having introduced the reader to complexity first.
Yes, I see what you mean. I mean, I do think that sometimes the problem with like hitting a really heavy subject head on can be that people see it as almost fetishizing the trauma or the pain a little bit, if you know what I mean. So the example that comes to mind there is like A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which like people love that book, but like a criticism that has been made of it, which I kind of agree with, is that she kind of just loves slightly torturing people in her stories, which is an interesting thing. Yes, it's true. There's a lot of trauma happening continuously. You're not looking away from it. So that's kind of the alternative, is that you show it clear on. You're not exploring that trauma with a obfuscation. You're just rendering it.
Sure.
And like that just lends a different feeling to it. And maybe the counterpoint of that is, okay, you're being like really honest and direct about the heavy subject, but on the other hand, are you like basically using that sort of, not torture porn sort of a thing, but like it's that type of feeling of, I'm just enjoying the grief, and I'm not being subtle about it. I'm just
I think the distinction I find more interesting is like whether or not you're like addressing the center like head on and then exploring outwards to like find the complexity of it, or whether or not you're exploring the complexity to like reveal what the center is.
Right, I see.
So
Yeah.
I'm not
Which
sure why.
direction?
Like the example that jumped to my head for that was like Still Alice, I think it was
Oh,
called, which
yeah.
is like a
That's a great film.
Was it? Yeah, was it book as well? I'm not sure.
I think so.
But like I think you find out about the dementia pretty early on, and then you know where it's going, but you're exploring like what else that like leads
That
to.
means, yeah.
Versus something else where you like have to figure out what's going on later, or the subject emerges as a result of having been introduced to the complexity.
Yeah,
like I'm
right.
not sure whether that's just to do with the amount of assumptions that reader is going to make bringing into something. Like for dementia, I don't know a lot about it really.
Sure.
And I might just be interested to learn, whereas if it's particularly like a politically charged topic, for example, like the Dutch book, where people might be on one side or the other and may wish to like represent the complexity before people come in with like preconceived notions.
Sure.
It might be kind of necessary to walk around the center before the center emerges, because otherwise you're not going to be really able to write about that to somebody
true.
because they're going to have an opinion on it, which you're then going to have to fight against.
Right. Yes, and I think for something like that, where it's sort of a piece of history that's maybe underexplored or something along those lines, like there are subjects like that which maybe you need to introduce by sort of walking around it and kind of coming at it more slowly. Whereas maybe in the case of like A Little Life, for instance, this is an experience which maybe people know but don't want to look at. So maybe that,
Right.
therefore, it's better to just be direct and say, look at this thing, if you know what I mean. So maybe it matters what is it that you think that you're making and for whom, kind of a thing.
Right, okay.
Do you think, I don't know, is that something that you were thinking about in terms of the story that you wrote? Like, what am I making, basically? Or what do I want to make? Or were you just letting it emerge, kind of thing?
I think that was more of I was interested in capturing a feeling.
Right.
So if I found some like a feeling in myself that is just a little bit odd, the feeling you have where a bunch of people that you know in one context, you kind of behave one way to them, and a bunch of people know in another context, and it sort of feels like you have slightly different identity for those two people, and then they meet and like
it's a weird
how do you
dissonance.
behave in that situation where you somehow have two different parts of identity, which is like a silly like small thing in life, but it's a feeling that pops up, and I was just curious about like capturing that feeling and using the story as a vehicle for putting that in a bottle. And it was like, how can I represent this feeling
with
some words?
Yeah, sure. Sounds like that feeling was kind of the stone in the soup idea, which I think my friend Katie was the first person who ever said this to me. But that, you know, you get this, you need to make a soup, and so you just take whichever idea comes to you first, and that's the stone. And then you, as you are making the soup, you are adding in lots of other ideas and thoughts as ingredients for your soup. Sometimes you get to the end of that process and you have the soup, but there's still a stone in it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And so then you have to take that idea out because it no longer fits. But sometimes you needed that stone anyway, right, to get started. So it's kind of that thing of like, is that still what you were trying to make to begin with, or is it now just a stone in your otherwise nice soup?
Yes,
basically.
I think it's in a George Orwell essay, possibly in the Why I Write book.
Yeah,
where he's talking about the idea that like the thing that made you want to write the book isn't necessarily the thing that should be in the book at the end of it.
Right.
So like all writing is political and things, because that's one of his like wheelhorse things.
Yeah.
Wheelhorse, is that a word? It's not a word. Whatever. You know what I mean.
It's one of his pet subjects.
Yes, pet subject. Yes, he's got a pet wheelhorse.
Nice.
And I think he uses Victor Hugo as an example of this. But like in Les Miserables, there is a section that just feels completely out of place to me, where it's just like talking about like this entire Battle of Waterloo and like walking through all these things that happened in it. And the entire point is that one guy got a medal at the end of it, which was from the wrong side, so it didn't really count. But he's a minor character in the book, but there's this massive section justifying this one thing, and it's just, I don't know why it's there. but that might have just been he was really interested in that idea and that was really important to him writing it. But it just feels weird to read the book and be like, why
is this scene here?
Why am I reading about all of these details? Which is a very, very long book.
Yeah, sure. And maybe it could have been fine without it, type of a thing.
Yes.
But I think that happens, right? Like when you write anything or create anything, you might change your idea about something, and that's kind of the joy of making the thing, is that you'll find out something. You find out what you think about something. This kind of also reminds me of this essay I was reading recently from Ursula Le Guin. It's in this collection called Space Crone, but she basically is like reflecting, I don't know how many decades after the fact of having written The Left Hand of Darkness, about all the criticisms that were made of that work, basically saying, why did you use these pronouns? Why didn't you think about this? Because it's ostensibly about gender, and gender politics had moved on quite a bit by the time she's having this reflection.
Right.
Lots had changed in society in terms of thinking about those subjects. And she isn't trying to, in really good faith, respond to those arguments. And she basically is saying, yeah, I would have considered all these additional things if I'd written the book now, but how could I have written it any other way? It's interesting because she's obviously saying, writing that book was still really valuable and I'm happy with it, but I acknowledge that this is an ongoing process. And basically what she thought the book was about, she saw opportunities to make that more complex after the fact, which I think is a really honest and nice and interesting thing to do, because I think if I look back at work that I wrote even a year ago, there's no additional context that I could have had at that moment, right? And so it just is what it is. And maybe now I would attack that subject a completely different way if I was starting from scratch now.
There's two things there. There's kind of the you're talking about writing in order to explore a subject for yourself, where you're trying to find the center author. You're kind of trying to find out what it is that you're writing about.
Yeah.
Which is a little different to wanting to write about something and trying not to miss the mark by accidentally writing about something
else. Yeah, sure.
Which is just two different ways of going about the same thing.
Yeah,
do you usually have a clear thing that you want to be writing about, or are you often more of an explorer? You said before that you're not big on plot and things, but
yeah, I mean, I do think, I don't know if you can separate one way of doing things from the other. So I don't think there's such a thing, for instance, as being a pure plotter or being a pure pantser. I feel like they kind of...
A pantser?
That's what they call it, a plotter versus a pantser.
What's a pantser?
A pantser is a person who, I guess,
flies by the seat of their pants.
Yes, flies by the seat of their pants and doesn't
Not there's
plot.
People that makes plots and there's people that pull other people's trousers
Correct,
down.
yeah, no.
Right. That seems like a very strange dichotomy, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a completely true reflection. You're going to be needing to do a little bit of both, as if you really meaningfully mean to finish something, then you're going to have to do a bit of both and go back and forth between the two. So I don't know if you can stop the center moving, if you know what I mean, because I don't know. Do you think you can stop the center from moving?
Well, no, I'm not sure I don't know. So I think those are two slightly separate things.
Sure.
Because plotting and I guess pantsing to me are ways of doing the writing.
Sure.
But you may still have a clear idea about what the center is and then pants your way to there.
Yeah.
Versus plotting it. But you may also be have a good plot and you're sure there's an interesting idea in there somewhere, but you're not quite sure what the thing is, which emerges as you go through it.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I think having a clear idea about what the center of the story is not necessarily the same as the method by which you're
going to explore
going to find it.
Yeah, sure.
Because what I was talking about originally is I've got a very clear idea about what the center is, and I'm not sure how to get there.
Yeah.
Not sure how to end up in a thing which will have that in the middle. Whereas other things I've not got a character or something, I'm not really sure. You might be interested in just this concept or this situation and you just want to see where it goes, and then might end up with you might want to find a center later on. So
I think I err on that side, to be honest, where I am more interested in a particular scenario or a particular image or a particular character detail or something like that. And then I'm just interested in knowing, well, what will that mean? And so I do think I tend to approach it more from that point of like, well, let's find out what the center is, rather than being like, oh, I'd like to write a story about grief or something like that.
Right. Okay.
And then mining that
Yes.
as far as possible. Just because I think if you do it that way, for instance, let's take grief as the example. I just don't think you can say that effectively and actually hope to produce a piece of work. Like, all grief is specific to the individual under certain circumstances. And therefore, I need the individual in the circumstances who is then exposed to grief. I can't just be like, well, what's all the possible manifestations of grief? Because that's too big of a question and also doesn't feel accurate to that concept. Maybe there are concepts that are not like that. I don't know.
So I think a good example of, I think concept is the right word.
Right.
Because I think this is more applicable to something like science fiction.
Yeah.
Where something is very concept based.
Sure, yeah.
And an example I would pick of that I think is really excellent at this is like Black Mirror.
Right.
Because I think a lot of those episodes you can boil back to the what if this thing? And I don't know how those were written, but I feel like a lot of those, I feel like that series is so strong, or a lot of the very good episodes of it are so strong because they have such of a what if, like what if we had robots that could go around and kill people? And they've taken that center and expanded outwards from it.
Yeah.
I imagine to explore the full depth of that what if.
Yes.
And as a result, that feels extremely well carved. And when you're going through that story, you end up, everything points back to the question.
Right.
And that's why it feels so strong to me.
Maybe that is a facet of also the format, though, don't you think? Because in the sense of...
How do you mean?
It's episodic and it has to be one self-contained episode for
perhaps,
television.
Yes.
I don't know if that plays a role in it, but it sort of makes sense that if you've only got 35 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever it is to execute an idea, you need things to sort of hold that center of gravity a bit more tightly. Whereas if you've got, 100,000 words, it might sprawl.
That's true.
I don't know. What do you think?
True. I'm not sure I can think of an example of a very large book or something backed by one question or concept.
Yeah. You've read Infinite Jest. I haven't. Is that one thing? It doesn't seem like it.
No.
It seems quite sprawling.
I guess it's about, it's about drug use in tennis, which makes it sound like it's about drug abuse in tennis. Like, if you give that somebody as a description, they will think it's about something wildly different.
Yeah.
It's about people that are really into tennis and there's just a lot of drug use.
Sure.
And also there are Canadian separatist wheelchair assassins there.
Excellent, yeah. Nice.
It's certainly sprawling.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I mean, I just was trying to think of long books off the top of my head.
I think about the idea of the center of a story or something a lot, but that might just be my preference to being like, I want to have a
clear
a thing at the start which is sort of around,
well,
or like a fuzzy idea where I know there's something there that I find interesting and I want to figure out exactly where it is. I want to narrow it down to a point, but I'm not sure stories necessarily have to have that. Like, things can be compelling without having a particular point. I
mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is again sort of back to like your preference for how much sort of expansion or ambiguity or open-endedness you're comfortable with. Another kind of example that comes to my mind, which I know wasn't your favorite book ever, was Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf.
I just expected to like it more than I did. That was fine.
Sure, but I just mean, it's obviously stream of consciousness, right? So it's sort of everything freewheeling out from one perspective point. Like, it starts with a woman buying flowers and then it just sort of like wheels out in lots of different directions. And I wonder if that's like, it's more about the form and the tone than it is about any one particular point.
Maybe it's about the having a character as the center.
Sure,
because I think we're just naturally interested in people to identify with.
That's true.
And being very heavily in somebody's head and following along with them and identifying with them, that just might be a style of story in itself.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I guess this comes back to my thing about grief or whatever. Like, if you've got a big concept, it sort of doesn't mean anything unless it's contextualized. And so, yes, maybe we are just like naturally more drawn to like a character or a point of view, which is why like it's always perplexed me when people say things like, oh, I just redrafted my book in past tense or whatever. I've just changed the tense completely. Or I've just changed it was in present and now it's in past. Like those are fundamentally different. Like that to me is like such a source of narrative gravity. There's a really different slant to an idea that is executed with reflection. So like in the past tense from a vantage point, if like that's a really different thing than if you're just like in the present tense and things are happening to you and you don't really have time to react. Like that's a different story you're able to tell in that context.
Do you think that is a differing ideas about what the central things is? Like maybe to you those kinds of things are always what is very central because you like very character-based things.
Yeah,
like
sure.
I couldn't imagine something like Remains of the Day or in fact other Ishiguro books like not being written in that tone because he's very interested in memory and that sort of thing. That feels like quite essential to what the writer is trying to do. Whereas other things it might not be. They might be more interested in the plot or the world, or that is the kind of central concept to them, and the idea of like the viewpoint is actually more replaceable because that's just a lens at which you're looking through the actual core of the story.
I see what you're saying. I mean, I think I would contend that if you just change the perspective and that has to fundamentally change the story. They're too interlinked in my view. So I think even if you are more interested in plot, whoever is executing or narrating that plot is going to be not that optional, basically. Like that will hold the center of the story somewhere else. And maybe that's the thing with like, oh, you know, if you think you're writing a story about one thing and you've written it from one character's point of view, let's say in first person, the second you change that to third, the center has to change a bit because you've now widened the world. And so you're not holding us tightly to one perspective, one idea, one view of the world. You just can't because you've zoomed out, basically. This is kind of gets to my question of like, is there a difference between the structural choices you make and the essence of the story itself? Because I find it really hard to see a difference between them.
I mean, they're definitely not very overlapping and so on. I think the idea about the center is really what is the most essential thing to you as the person making it, as the writer, as the designer, whatever.
Do you think this is the same as, because we read this essay a while ago from Mary Gaskell about where she talked about, well, she called it the deracination of literature, which is an insane word.
I looked that word up.
Yeah.
It was not a word I've ever used or will use.
No, it's literally just the title of this essay, but she's talking about the inner weave of a story in that essay. And I think she's sort of talking about it as like a life force or something like that, like a really difficult to define, like central thing that is weaving that story together as a whole and giving it sort of life beyond the page or whatever. I don't know if that's kind of what we're getting at here. It's like this thing that pulls everything else together and gives it weight or life.
Yeah. I think that is what that's not what I took the phrase inner weave to mean. I was thinking more about like the implied life of characters outside what is explicitly written.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, no, I think like the way you just described it is kind of what I'm thinking of.
Right.
That there is something. It's not just. I'm sure you could write a story which is just an ordinary day in somebody's life, which was entertaining and interesting, and that you appeal to it, but didn't really have much of a point. It was just like a nice ride.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't really have a kind of thing that you wanted to put across. But I think because somebody was interested enough to write a story or make a piece of art about something, there is a thing that is interesting to them that they want to be interesting to a person reading it or watching it or otherwise experiencing the art. Like there's a connection thing there, which is I've got this thing which I think is interesting. I want you to find this interesting the way I find it interesting.
Sure.
Like I'm trying to put a shape in my brain inside your brain, and all I've got is these words and pictures and stuff which are useless.
Yeah.
Like they're all, it's hard to plug it together. So how do I communicate my brain
to you
through this stuff?
Yes. Yeah, right. That's kind of well, we were talking earlier about this like literary journal that I started with a friend of mine, Katie again, where we're including authors' notes with all the pieces that we're publishing in this journal because we were interested in that exact thing. Like, what was the spark What was
Yeah.
the instinct that you had when you wrote this piece? We would like to know about that if you want to tell us, kind of thing. So
Okay.
we decided to like include those notes alongside each piece, just so that if a person is interested in that, like the gut thing that created that piece, they can read it from the author themselves, which goes against this kind of like death of the author, Roland Barthes, whatever sort of
Yeah.
thinking about like work, which is that it should be this like polished, finished thing that you just look at and you don't get any information about what the sort of spark or the idea or the initiating thought was unless you go and ask the author. I think obviously postmodernism says you shouldn't really go ask that question, or you shouldn't be interested in that in some senses. Like it's finished without the author, or the author is not as interesting or as important as maybe you might have thought once upon a time. But I don't know. I think I'm interested to know why people do things. So I find that like a really difficult thing to react to, because I actually do want to know. Like, I'm kind of just curious, like, why did you make this thing?
Yeah. But I think also people generally want to put the reason they made it in the thing that they make.
Sure, yeah. So it's just contained there and you have to read into it, sort of thing.
Yeah, like I don't think it has to be one way or the other, but
Yeah.
you know, if I want to write a story about the weird feeling, I don't just want to, or I want to find out something or write around an idea so that I can find it out for myself.
Yes.
I don't think I would be fully satisfied just to have found it out for myself without it being like readable to someone else.
Sure,
You know,
yeah.
I also want somebody interacting with that to like get the thing out of it as well.
Absolutely,
like
yeah.
I want to like reveal it and shape it, not just to myself, because otherwise it's a diary.
Right. Well, I wouldn't dismiss the diary, but yes.
No. But I like the diary and things like that. But I don't like give those to friends for review.
Sure. Yes, I understand what you mean. Yeah, the whole point of like making something artistic is that maybe you want to connect with somebody else, and that requires them to engage with it on some level. The artistic urge is, this is interesting to me. Is it interesting to you?
Yes.
Like asking that question basically is kind of the whole reason why maybe you make something and you put it out there, because you want that reaction. And if it's not understandable or discernible to that other person, then that feels like rejection of the thing you find interesting.
Or at least like the possibility of it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not necessarily interested in people like being popular or whatever, but you know, like I want to. It feels like it's a failure to have achieved what I was trying to get to if it wasn't in theory understandable by somebody else.
Yeah.
Like the whole like you just want one stranger to like it.
Exactly.
Like
yeah.
one stranger to like it means that my brain is someone else's brain.
Yes, totally. And you're not on your own.
Push my brain around.
Yes, exactly.
Everyone my brain.
Just fighting solipsism here. We just don't want to be the only person who's thinking thoughts. But I find it really intriguing when people react to things that I make in ways that I completely didn't expect.
Sure.
But that's not like illegitimate, right? Like obviously you can feel any which way you want about a piece of art. Like I wrote this story some years ago called Salami Week.
Oh, yes.
Because it was a competition, like they gave out awards and you got to actually like chat to people who'd chosen the stories that they awarded. And I just found that really fascinating, because I thought the story was about a young woman like discovering her sexuality. And like in order to understand that about the story, you had to have read the character as a woman being attracted to another woman. But I had someone come up to me who was a judge who was like, oh, I thought it was a man narrating, and I thought you would be a man who wrote the story. And I was just like, okay, so you have understood a totally different story. Like they still liked it because they were like, oh yeah, I chose your story. Like that was really interesting. But then obviously I have no idea what they thought the story was about, if not that thing. So I didn't really know how to feel about that. Like it was fine. And I'm really glad they liked it. But I'm not sure what story they read, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, that's
in
just
that context.
Like, all of the building blocks you've got to. This is back to the original like narrative gravity thing.
Yeah.
It's just like each of the words has a bunch of connotations associated with it that you were thinking about some of them, but when you give it to somebody, they get all of them.
Yes.
And some of those might not be the ones you were thinking about originally. And if you went to it via one route, it might be hard for you to see it the way somebody else is going to see it when they see that word fresh without any context.
Totally, yeah. Yeah.
So I have a thing that I like to do when I'm not sure what it is I'm writing about, which I call gardening,
Okay.
which is kind of why we call this story gardening, I
Right.
think. So if I'm not sure what a story is about, but I think that there's a sort of story there or there's something interesting, I like to just write down a bunch of the ideas or snippets of whatever I have in my head in a very free form way, just to put them all out of my head and see where they kind of go. I kind of like doing that specifically because I'm not sure what it is that I want to write about, but I know there's something there. I have like the instinct that there is something interesting to me there, but I need to kind of know what it is
I see.
in order to know what direction I want to write in.
Right.
And we'll literally write, I don't know, if they get married, they don't get married, they used to be married, and just like write lots of contradictory things in a row.
Right.
So you're kind of like exploring directions at which
You might go.
Because it's not really obvious to be able to like pick the perfect thing out of my head, but it's a bit more obvious when you've written it down some of the time. And that's kind of useful as a method for like finding out what is the thing that I'm actually interested in.
Yeah, which direction you want to go in.
Like I don't know whether you do anything like this.
Yeah. This kind of like reminds me of what you were saying the last time we talked. You don't always know what's right, but knowing what's wrong
Yes, exactly.
is like the thing that helps you figure out what it's about, kind of thing.
Yes.
Like, oh, it's definitely not this. So that's wrong, and I'll eliminate that option, kind of thing.
I will genuinely, when I'm writing this, I tend to write it in a like first person plural, like I'm talking to myself, like let's try this.
Right.
Like where are we at?
Yeah.
I will literally write things like that. Well, that's not quite right. And I will move on.
Yes, totally.
A friend once said to me like that he reckons you could just write a dictionary where it just had every other word that it was connected to next to the word, and you would be able to figure out what the word meant by association.
Yes,
like
totally.
in a way, a thesaurus is basically a dictionary.
Yeah,
where
right.
You didn't need a dictionary to define it. You could just figure out by the relationships between the words what the word meant.
The connective tissue kind of tells you what's at the heart of it.
And that's kind of what you have to do when you're picking words and also picking ideas.
Yeah, sure.
I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I do anything like that. I think only because maybe my instinct when I'm making stuff is much more about form and structure than it is about directionality or options and ways an idea might go. Like, so one thing that was really interesting in the last book I was writing was that I'd been writing in prose for ages and just sort of stuck with a character and couldn't figure out what the character like needed to be or how they needed to sound and all of that sort of stuff. And then I wrote a poem in the character's voice, and it immediately unlocked all these options of what that character could be and how they would act.
Okay.
So I had to literally just like switch into another structure, another form, in order to explore that question of like what, as opposed to just sort of like making free associations. I found that too vague for me, maybe, or something like that.
Sure.
So I had to just like find another structure, another mode, another kind of like, that sort of forces you to challenge the voice in a different way or challenge the character in a different way. And that revealed something to me, which then made it way easier to write. So I think I like to do stuff like that, where it's like, I know that what you're doing is writing a piece of prose. Now you're going to do a painting about it or whatever. I'm forcing my brain to like literally use
something or something. Yeah,
I would sketch sometimes. Now lately, I've actually recently bought a 35mm camera, film camera, and it's a half frame. So it forces you to sort of think about two images next to each other that you might.
Half frame?
Half frame means that one frame normally is divided into two. One frame of the film is divided into two.
Oh, okay.
So you get two shots per every one little square of film.
So the shutter just takes it on the left half or the right half?
Exactly. I don't know exactly how it technically executes it inside the camera. Magic, yeah. Camera magic. But it's like a camera from like the 70s that I've bought secondhand. And basically, it will put two pictures side by side. So it's forcing my brain to think about what are the two things you would put next to each other, as opposed to what's one image I want to create. And just by doing that, it's like made me think about like structuring like a little story, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Each time I'm taking a picture, which I think is really interesting. It's basically just like forcing my brain to engage in a completely different manner with the type of storytelling that I'm doing. And I almost feel like I want to do the same thing with my writing, which is to say, what else is going to force me to rethink the way I'm telling this story? And like, I need to push myself out of the comfort zone of this type of prose or something in order to figure that out.
Yeah.
So that's the way I like to figure out like what other options are available to me. And maybe that's just because my impulse is always kind of almost structural or something like that. I'm not sure.
No, I think that's just a natural input, because that's the, like, I want to talk about that another time. Like that's what the mind's groove to me is. It's like you're stuck in the same ways doing things, and you need to, it's quite difficult to make connections outside the normal way of doing it. Do you go back to the poem and look at it to think about the character, or was it just the making it once that like did that become a kind of like a lighthouse, like a totem for
for the story,
for referencing, not even referencing, but like thinking about when you wanted to think about the character?
I think it did end up becoming a little bit of a totem, in the sense that every time I looked back at the poem, I didn't look back at it a ton, but every time I did, it was like, oh yes, that's the center of that voice of that character. Like it got to the heart of what that character should sound like to me. So it was a totem in that sense, because it was kind of like, this is a clear articulation of the type of voice I'm trying to create. Whereas I don't know if I would have been able to just like write my way into it with the prose. So so it did become a little bit of like a clarifying.
I wonder whether that's just an interesting practice in itself. I have heard there's a video game called Outer Wilds, which I won't say too much about because it's a nice game to play without knowing anything about.
Right.
But I know that the creator of it was told to create an emotional prototype or something, which was just like a thing that they could look back on. Just make the bit which makes you feel like that's how the game wants to feel, which was just these aliens like sitting, like roasting a marshmallow over a campfire while the sun explodes. Which is kind of what the game is. Like it's hard to explain why that's the thing, but it's like it's kind of representative of the game. And I liked that idea of just having the emotional prototype thing, which was just this thing feels the way I want it to feel, and to me that sounds like that poem is that
my emotional prototype.
This is this little thing is what I want the art to be.
I want it to feel like this.
Like that's kind of the center, I guess. It's like to me that's that feeling. Sometimes you start with it, it's like, this is what I want the story to be.
Yes, that's the center of the story.
Yes.